What kind of man walks out on Friday and walks back in on Monday with the whole table flipped? My name is Henry Mace. I'm 44 years old, and I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I've been working as a construction consultant for over 20 years, and I've never walked into a meeting like the one I had that Thursday afternoon with Linda Caldwell. She called me in right after lunch. Her office door was open when I got there, and she didn't bother to close it. That was my first warning. Linda was always about appearances, always careful to keep things neat. If she left the door open, it meant she wanted everyone to hear what was about to happen. I stepped inside and sat down across from her. She was already leaning back in her chair, arms folded, that smile she wore when she thought she was in control. "Henry," she said, "all business. Let's not drag this out. You're not leadership material. Your spot on the North Harbor expansion isn't secure." I just blinked at her. I'd spent months working on that project, practically living at the office. I was the one who found the leak in the budget proposal, the one who redid the entire materials list to save the bid. And she was telling me I wasn't good enough? I kept my voice calm. "Not leadership material," I repeated. "Since when?" Linda tilted her head like she was talking to a child. "The team needs someone more dynamic. A fresh face. You understand how these things work." Sure, I understood. I understood that the fresh face she wanted was her own, that she was using my work to boost her name and get herself the big promotion. I pressed my lips together, trying not to let my anger show. "Linda," I said, "you know my blueprint saved that bid. You said it yourself in the meeting last week." She waved a hand, like she was shooing away a fly. "I pitched it, Henry. The council liked my pitch. That's what matters to them." And to Monroe Contracting. I could feel my jaw tighten, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Friday," she said lightly. "Pack up your things by then. Monday, we'll be announcing some changes to the project leads." I smiled at that. It wasn't a nice smile. "Sure," I said, nodding. "I'll be out by Friday. But Monday?" I paused, looking her dead in the eye. "Monday's going to be interesting." She didn't like that. She sat up a little straighter, her eyes narrowing just a bit. But she didn't say anything. She just gave me a tight smile and turned her attention back to her computer. I stood up and walked out. The junior staffers at their desks went quiet as I passed. They all knew Linda was ruthless, but I don't think they realized just how far she'd go to make sure she got the credit. As I packed up my desk, I thought about everything I'd done for Monroe Contracting. All the nights I'd spent reworking bad plans, smoothing over supplier issues, making sure the team had what they needed, and how Linda had always found a way to stand right next to me when the cameras were out, so she could smile and say she led the charge. She thought she'd won, that I'd leave quietly, and she'd take the credit for my work. She didn't know that I'd been backing up every file I touched, every timeline I made, every single note. She didn't know about the emails she'd sent me, calling my work genius, praising me in private while she smiled for the board in public. She thought I was done. But the thing about me is, I don't lose quietly. So when Monday comes, she'll find out exactly what kind of man she tried to bury. I met James Rowe from Breyer and Lang in the lobby that Friday morning. He was all smiles, dressed in a crisp blue suit that looked like it belonged in a magazine ad. I didn't recognize him at first. We'd never worked together, and I had no idea why he'd be here to see me. "Henry Mace?" he asked, extending his hand. "James Rowe, Breyer and Lang." I shook his hand, my mind already spinning. "I've never worked with Breyer and Lang." James smiled, like he'd heard that 100 times. "I know, but we've got something exciting brewing. Your Portland proposal was brilliant." I felt my stomach drop. Portland proposal? I hadn't submitted any official Portland proposal. I'd spent hours sketching out a waterfront restoration plan in my own time. Sure, but it was never more than a personal concept, just a hobby project I'd been toying with. I never showed it to anyone. "What are you talking about?" I asked carefully. "I never submitted anything for Portland." James looked genuinely puzzled. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a glossy binder. "This, Linda shared it with us last month. She said it was a joint initiative between your team and hers." I took the binder from his hands, flipping through the pages. My sketches, my diagrams, my notes, even the ones I scribbled in the margins when I thought no one would ever see them. My private work, sitting there with Breyer and Lang's logo stamped on every page. It felt like the floor was falling out from under me. I looked up at James. "She took this from my desktop," I said, my voice low. "I never gave her permission." James shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize there was any confusion. She presented it as part of the North Harbor initiative." My mouth was dry. I handed the binder back to him, my hand shaking just enough for him to notice. "Excuse me," I said, turning on my heel and heading for the elevator. As I rode up to my floor, my mind was racing. She must have grabbed the files while I was on vacation last month. My desktop was unlocked. I always trusted my team. Never thought I'd need to password protect a few sketches. And Linda, she'd been there late one night, going over bids. She must have seen them, realized what she had. A company-wide meeting was set for 3 p.m. that day. I knew Linda would be front and center, playing it up for the staff. She'd present the Portland concept as her own, push it as the firm's new visionary direction. I had to get to my office fast. I didn't have much time before she went public with my work. Back at my desk, I pulled out my old external hard drive. It had everything: original CD files with metadata, emails where Linda called the sketches "your magic," and even early drafts I'd emailed myself for safekeeping. My entire history on that project, timestamped and dated. I backed everything up to the cloud. Every file, every note. My insurance policy, in case Linda tried to rewrite the past even further. I looked around my office, the walls lined with project photos, all with Linda's name on the brass plaques. She'd spent years building her name off of my sweat and late nights. Every framed photo was a reminder of that. But today, those reminders felt different. Today, they felt like evidence. At 3 o'clock, I walked into the conference room. Linda was already there, standing at the head of the table, all smiles and bright lipstick. She was the star of the show, basking in the glow of stolen light. As the staff settled in, she glanced at me, her smile flickering just for a second. She didn't know what I had yet, but she would soon, because the work she stole, that was mine. And by the end of the day, she'd know exactly what it felt like to have someone else rewrite your legacy. 3 o'clock sharp. The all-staff meeting was already buzzing with excitement when I walked in. Everyone was packed into the main conference room, shoulder to shoulder, eyes on the big screen at the front. Linda stood there like a queen, hair perfect, smile bright. She didn't even glance at me when I walked in. "Welcome, everyone," she said, her voice warm and confident. "Today, we're unveiling the future of Monroe Contracting." I felt the weight of every eye in the room settle on her. She thrived on that. She always had. She didn't bother with small talk, didn't waste a second. She launched straight into the presentation, clicking through slides that showed my sketches, my designs, all rebranded with Monroe's logo and her name. "This," she said, pausing dramatically as the Portland waterfront concept appeared on the screen, "is the direction we'll be taking our firm. It's innovative, sustainable, and unlike anything else in the industry." I forced myself to keep my face neutral. My heart was thudding in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I watched as she gestured to the images, as she pointed out the design elements she had no hand in. She even threw in little personal touches, like the story of how she'd been inspired by the landscape after her trip to Oregon. That trip never happened. I'd made those sketches late one night at my kitchen table while she was probably at some networking event. She ended the slideshow with a flourish, turning back to the staff. "I'm honored to lead us into this next chapter," she said, her smile wide, her eyes shining. "And I'm proud to announce that I'll be stepping in as creative director, effective immediately." Applause erupted. Harold Monroe, the founder himself, stood and clapped along with everyone else. "Linda, you're the future of this company," he said, his voice warm. "Your vision is exactly what we need." I felt like I was watching someone else's life play out in front of me. I slipped out of my seat and walked over to Harold, tapping him lightly on the shoulder. "Harold," I said quietly, "can we talk? Privately." But before he could answer, Linda was there, sliding in between us with that practiced smile. "Oh, don't worry, Henry," she said sweetly. "We'll make sure you're looped in later." "Now," I said, my voice firm. Harold looked at me, then at Linda. His brow creased. "Is there a problem, Henry?" "Just a conversation," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I was boiling. Linda shot me a warning look, the kind that said shut up and smile, the kind she'd used more than once in smaller meetings when she wanted the credit to stay hers. But I didn't shut up. "Harold," I said again, "it's important." He sighed and motioned toward his office. Linda stayed close on his heels, like she was afraid I'd get a word in before she could twist it. The second we stepped inside, she dropped the sweet act. "You're overreacting," she snapped. "This isn't the time or place." I ignored her and turned to Harold. "She's using my work, Harold. The Portland plan, that was mine. I never submitted it to Breyer and Lang. Linda took it from my personal files." Linda let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Henry, you're confused. Those were shared drafts, collaborative efforts." "No," I said, my voice firm. "They were my private sketches. She had no right to share them." Linda's eyes narrowed. "You're just trying to sabotage me because you're bitter," she said, her voice low and cold. "You've been having performance issues for months. You're lashing out because you're scared." "Performance issues?" I repeated, stunned. "You're lying." She turned back to Harold, her voice dropping into that gentle, reasonable tone she always used when she wanted to sound credible. "Harold, I'm sorry you have to hear this," she said softly. "I've been covering for him for months. Missed deadlines, sloppy work, arguments with suppliers. And now he's trying to flip it back on me." Harold looked at me, frowning. "Henry, is there any truth to that?" My mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. I'd spent years making sure this company never missed a deadline because of me. Years making sure Linda never had to lift a finger beyond smiling for the camera. And now she was flipping the script, rewriting everything. "Harold," I said finally, my voice steady, "I have proof. Original CAD files, emails, everything." But Linda was already shaking her head. "I've already spoken to HR," she said calmly. "They'll be in touch. We'll find a graceful exit for you, Henry, but you're done here." And just like that, the conversation was over. Harold didn't say another word. Linda walked out first, leaving me standing there in the middle of Harold's office, feeling like the floor had fallen out from under me. An hour later, HR handed me a severance package. "We'd like you to pack up quietly," they said. "It's better for everyone." Better for Linda, they meant. Better for the story she wanted to tell. As I packed up my things, I realized she wasn't just stealing my work. She was rewriting my entire story, turning me into the villain of her perfect little narrative. But I wasn't going to let her end it there. Monday was coming. And Monday, I wasn't going to be the quiet one anymore. I packed up my office in silence. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just kept my head down and shoved the last of my files into a cardboard box. Every few minutes, my phone buzzed. Texts from people who'd been in that meeting, messages from people I'd trained, people I'd thought were friends. "Sorry, man. Didn't see that coming. You okay? Let me know if you want to grab a drink." They meant well, but I didn't need drinks. I needed proof. As I walked down the hall, Jenna from reception caught my eye. She'd always been kind, always greeted me by name, even when I was buried in deadlines. She hugged me, whispering in my ear, "We know, Henry, we know." Her words stayed with me all the way to my car. I drove straight home, my box of things rattling in the passenger seat. When I walked through the door, I didn't even take off my jacket. I went straight to my computer and started backing up everything. The CAD files, the old emails, the performance reviews where Linda herself praised my work. My hard drive was like a vault, everything that proved I'd built this project, not her. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mark. He'd been with Monroe Contracting almost as long as me, the kind of guy who always had my back on site, always knew how to keep a crew moving. He came by an hour later, knocking softly before letting himself in. "She's telling everyone you were leaking files to Breyer and Lang," he said, his voice low. "Says you've been feeding them inside info for months." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she is," I said, shaking my head. "She's not just stealing my work. She's framing me for espionage." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "You know how people talk. She's got half the staff convinced you were in bed with them the whole time." I looked at him. "I wasn't," I said quietly. "You know that, right?" He nodded. "I know, but she's good at this. She's already got people nervous." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of it all settle into my bones. "She used my email while I was on vacation," I said. "That's how she shared the files. She had access to my desktop. She set it up so it would look like I was the one sending them." Mark let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Henry." I pulled up the email Linda had sent me months back, the one where she called my coastal restoration sketches your magic. I had kept it buried in a folder of old correspondence. Now, it felt like a lifeline. "Look at this," I said, showing him the screen. She admitted it was my idea. She just never expected I'd have the receipts. Mark stared at it for a moment, then looked back at me. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fight," I said simply. "I'm going to take this straight to the board. And if they won't listen, I'll go to the city officials. She's trying to rewrite the story, but I have the proof." He hesitated, then nodded. "If you need anything, I've got your back." As the evening settled in, I got one last email. It was from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Confidential, project files." I knew immediately it was bait. Linda was trying to set me up one last time, to get me to open a file she could say was sensitive or stolen. I didn't click it. I didn't even open it. I forwarded it straight to my lawyer, adding a note, "More of her games." After Mark left, I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the soft hum of the hard drive as it copied everything to the cloud. This was no longer just about my job. It was about my name, my work, my legacy. Linda thought she could burn it all down and walk away clean. But she didn't count on me having the evidence. She didn't count on me refusing to go quietly. I looked out the window at the streetlights flickering in the cold night air. My whole career had been about building things, bridges, roads, arbors. But now, I was going to build something else. I was going to build the case that proved exactly who she was. Because if Linda wanted a fight, she was about to get one. I didn't sleep much that weekend. I kept going back over every file, every email, every note I'd ever scribbled down. I wanted to be sure that when I walked in on Monday, I'd have everything I needed to end this. Early Monday morning, before the office filled up, I sent Harold an email. Subject, urgent, evidence of misconduct. Body, Harold. Attached is a dossier with clear evidence that the Portland waterfront concept was my original work, not Linda's. Please review this before our 9 a.m. meeting. I sat there for a minute after I had sinned, breathing deeply. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. This was it. No turning back. By 8:30, my phone buzzed with a reply. From Harold Monroe. Subject, urgent, evidence of misconduct. Body, Henry, thank you. I've seen enough to know we need to talk. Let's meet in my office before this morning's team briefing. I didn't even bother changing out of my work clothes. I just grabbed my laptop, my hard drive, and a printed timeline of everything Linda had stolen. Then I walked back into Monroe Contracting, the place that had been my second home for almost 2 decades. Harold's door was open when I got there. He looked up as I stepped in, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the usual calm in his eyes. He looked worried, panicked, even. Henry, he said, gesturing to the seat across from his desk. Tell me everything. I started from the beginning. The sketches, the late nights, how Linda took them from my desktop while I was out on vacation. I showed him the emails, the CD files with my metadata, the performance reviews where she called my work visionary. I showed him the email she sent to Breyer and Lang, with my files attached and my name scrubbed off the credits. Harold flipped through the binder of evidence I'd put together, his face getting redder with every page. When he finally looked up, he shook his head. She told me you were struggling, he said quietly. She said you'd been underperforming for months. I let out a humorless laugh. That's her story. But the truth is right there. He didn't argue. He just closed the binder and rubbed his forehead. The city's already asking questions, he said. Portland officials want to meet with her this week. They've seen your designs, but Linda can't explain them in detail. They're suspicious. I felt a flicker of vindication. She can't explain them because they're not hers, I said. They're mine. And if they find out she's been lying. He cut me off, his voice low. They already know, Henry. I've had calls all weekend. Breyer and Lang are backing away from the deal. Portland officials want answers. He paused, looking me dead in the eye. We can't afford a scandal, he said. But we can't bury this, either. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. I'm not interested in burying it. I'm interested in setting it straight. For a moment, Harold just stared at me. Then he nodded slowly. You'll need to present this to the board, he said. Today. I exhaled, feeling the tension in my chest ease just a bit. I'll be ready. He looked back at the binder, then at me. Henry, he said, his voice soft but serious. This is going to be messy. Linda's been with us a long time. She's built a lot of relationships here. I nodded. I know. Are you sure you want to do this? I didn't hesitate. I'm sure. He let out a slow breath. All right, let's get it done. As I walked out of Harold's office, I felt the weight of what was coming. Linda had spent years building her empire on my work. She'd made sure her name was the one everyone remembered. But she'd forgotten one thing. I'd always been the one actually building it. I didn't sleep much the night before the board meeting. I sat at my kitchen table, flipping through my binder of evidence over and over, as if I needed to convince myself one more time that I was right. But deep down, I knew I was. I built every line of that blueprint. Every detail had my name on it. The next morning, Harold called me. Meet me at the Hudson Cafe at 8, he said. We need to talk before we go in. I got there early. The place was quiet, the smell of fresh coffee hanging in the air. I saw Harold already at a corner table, his coat still on. He looked up as I sat down, his face drawn and tired. Henry, he said, folding his hands on the table. We're in a tough spot. Breyer and Lang pulled out of the Portland deal this morning. The city's furious. They're talking about pulling funding altogether. I nodded slowly. I figured. He looked me straight in the eye. Linda's the face of this firm right now. She's the one they all know. If this story goes public, it will, I said calmly, because I'm not letting her walk away with my work. Harold let out a long sigh. I'm not asking you to bury it, Henry, but I'm asking you to think about how this plays out. If we lose Portland, the whole firm takes a hit. I leaned back in my chair. So what do you want from me, Harold? I want you to come back, he said quietly. Help us salvage this. You're the only one who knows this project inside and out. I felt a flicker of something almost satisfaction. And Linda? I asked. He didn't answer at first. He just looked down at his hands, like he was weighing every word. She'll be removed from the project, he said finally. but I need you to come back in, officially, so we can show the city we're moving forward in good faith. I tilted my head, studying him. So you want me to come back, I said. You want me to fix the mess she made, and keep it quiet enough that the board doesn't lose face. Harold's jaw tightened. I'm asking you to help us rebuild this, he said. You're the only one who can. I pulled out my phone and opened the news app. The top headline read, Breyer and Lang withdraw from Portland project, citing intellectual property dispute. I turned the screen so Harold could see. This isn't quiet, I said softly. This is already blowing up. He swallowed hard. I know. I put the phone down and leaned forward. Here's what I want, I said. I want my name restored to every file, every drawing. I want a formal letter from the board acknowledging the theft and clearing my name. And I want Linda gone, not just off my project, but out of the company, permanently. Harold didn't speak for a moment. Then he let out a low breath. You're not giving me much choice, are you? I shrugged. Neither did she. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, he said. You'll get everything you asked for. I'll take it to the board this morning. I nodded, my chest tightening but steady. Then I'll be back in the office by 10, I said. And I'll start fixing this. Harold looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and shook my hand. Thank you, Henry, he said quietly, for not giving up. I pulled my hand back and stood up. I didn't give up, I said. I just stopped letting her steal what I built. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt the weight of what was coming. The project was in pieces, the firm was on the edge, but I wasn't going to let it fall. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just another guy in the background. I was the man who built it, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget that. I walked into the joint meeting at 10 sharp, binder in hand and a drive in my jacket pocket. The board members were already there, clustered around the long oak table in the executive conference room. Harold sat at the head, his face lined with stress. Linda was there too, standing near the screen like she was still in charge. She looked up when I walked in. For a split second, her smile faltered. Henry, she said, her voice smooth and bright. I didn't expect you here so soon. I didn't bother answering her. I walked straight to the projector and plugged in my hard drive. The screen flickered to life, showing my files, every single one of them with my name in the metadata, every single one of them dated and timestamped. Linda tried to brush past it. This is a waste of time, she said, her voice tight. We don't need to. I cut her off. Sit down, Linda, I said, my voice steady. You've had your say. Now it's my turn. She hesitated, then sat. I looked around the table at the board members, men and women who'd known me for years, people who'd seen me in hard hats on job sites and in late-night design meetings. Some of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly unsure of what was coming. I started slowly. This, I said, tapping the screen, is the Portland Waterfront Project. The real project? My project? Every file you're about to see has my name on it, not Linda's, mine. I clicked through the slides, showing the original CAD files, the early sketches, the budget notes, the performance reviews where Linda called my work visionary. Every page had a date. Every page had my name. I paused on an email she'd sent me a year ago. Her own words lit up on the big screen. Your coastal restoration concept is your magic, Henry. We'll build it out together. It's yours. The room was silent. Linda's face had gone pale. Linda didn't build this, I said quietly. She took it. While I was on vacation, she accessed my desktop, pulled my files, and presented them as her own. She didn't just steal credit, she stole my entire design and sold it to Breyer and Lang as a collaboration, without ever telling me. I turned to Linda. You want to explain that to the board? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her fingers fumbled with her phone, as if she could conjure some new excuse to make this all go away. I clicked to the next slide, a detailed timeline I'd put together, every change, every file, every move she'd made. I didn't come here to argue, I said calmly. I came to show you the truth. And here it is. One of the board members, a woman named Karen who'd always been fair to me, cleared her throat. Henry, she said softly, you're sure these files are authentic? I didn't hesitate. They're backed up to the cloud, and I've got the original hard drive here, I said, pulling it out of my pocket and setting it on the table. You can verify every single timestamp. Another board member turned to IT, who was standing at the back of the room. Check it, he said. The IT manager plugged in the drive and clicked through the files. They're real, he said after a moment, his voice matter-of-fact. The metadata's untouched. No edits. It's all Henry's work. I looked at Linda one last time. She was sitting rigidly in her chair, her jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. She tried one last play, turning to Harold with that same bright voice she always used when she needed to charm someone. Harold, you know I'd never. But he cut her off, his voice flat. Stop, Linda. Her eyes widened. She looked at the board, then back at me. For the first time, there was no script, no charm, no lie left to tell. The room went quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the projector. Then Karen spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "I think we've seen enough," she said. "Linda, you'll need to step outside while we finish this discussion." Linda looked around the room, eyes wide, as if she still couldn't believe it was happening. She stood slowly, her heels clicking across the floor. When she reached the door, she paused, turning to me one last time. "This isn't over, Henry," she said, her voice shaking with fury. I met her eyes, my own voice calm. "For you, it is." The door closed behind her, and the weight in the room seemed to lift. The board members looked at each other, then at me. "Thank you for bringing this to us," Karen said quietly. "We'll take it from here." I nodded. I didn't need to say anything else. As I walked out of that room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. My work was mine again. My name was back where it belonged. The house of cards Linda had built was finally collapsing, and this time, she couldn't spin her way out of it. Linda was gone by the end of the day. HR moved fast. One moment she was the star of the show, and the next, she was packing up her things in a cardboard box, her face pale and tight. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. I'd already won. Harold called me into his office just before the end of the day. He didn't say much at first, just looked at me for a long moment, like he was trying to figure out how he'd let this happen under his nose. "We owe you an apology," he said finally. "For everything." I just nodded. I didn't need the apology, I needed my name back. And I got it. He stood up and extended his hand. "We'd like you to step in as creative director," he said. Effective immediately. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. Then I took his hand and shook it, my grip firm. "Thank you," I said simply. He didn't ask me to forget what happened. He didn't ask me to pretend Linda hadn't nearly burned the whole place to the ground. He just said, "We need you to lead. You're the only one who can." I walked out of Harold's office with a new title and a new weight on my shoulders. But for the first time in a long time, it was a weight I wanted. Later that afternoon, an email went out to the entire firm. It was short, just a few lines acknowledging significant oversights and the invaluable contributions of Henry Mays to the Portland waterfront project and to Monroe Contracting as a whole. I didn't smile when I read it, but I felt something loosen in my chest, like a knot that had been there for years was finally gone. When I walked out into the office, people were already talking in hushed voices. A few of them glanced up as I passed, nodding respectfully. Some looked away, embarrassed they hadn't seen through Linda sooner. But that didn't matter to me. What mattered was that my name was back where it belonged and the work I'd done. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the design studio, going over the Portland plans again. Breyer and Lang had already pulled out, but the city's team was still willing to talk. I knew it would be an uphill battle, rebuilding trust, fixing the damage Linda had done, but I was ready. As I packed up for the day, Mark came by my office. He didn't say much, just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "We're glad you're back where you belong." I smiled at that, the first real smile I'd managed in weeks. By the time I left the building, the sun was already setting. I paused on the steps, looking out at the city skyline. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Linda would never work in this industry again. Word spreads fast when someone's caught red-handed. And as I walked to my car, I thought about the other people she'd used over the years, the people who'd been too scared or too tired to speak up. Maybe now they'd find their voices too. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure no one else got written out of their own story. I drove home in the quiet, feeling the kind of peace that only comes after a storm. The kind that says, "You've survived. You're still standing." And this time, no one was going to take that from me. That night, I sat down to dinner with my daughter, Ava. She was 10, all questions and bright eyes. She didn't know everything that had happened. She didn't need to, but she could see something had shifted. "Dad," she said, twirling spaghetti on her fork, "was it worth it?" I looked at her, her head tilted just like mine used to be when I was a kid, always curious, always wanting to know more. "Was what worth it?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Waiting so long to fix it," she said softly. "Letting them take your work." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all those years. "The weight wasn't," I said honestly. "But the justice? That part was worth every minute." She nodded slowly, like she was storing my words somewhere safe. And in that moment, I realized that's what this was really about. Not just the job, or the titles, or the plans on paper. It was about making sure the people you love, the people who matter, know exactly who you are. The next morning, I walked back into Monroe Contracting like I belonged there. Because I did. I wasn't the guy in the corner anymore. The one who stayed late so someone else could take credit. I was the man they turned to when the sky was falling. And I made damn sure they'd never forget it. I set new rules for attribution, clear and unbreakable. Every plan, Every sketch, every idea had a name tag, mine, and I didn't just hide behind it. I put it out front, where everyone could see. Because if I learned one thing through all of this, it was that you can't let your work speak for itself if you're not willing to stand up and claim it. I also started mentoring the younger guys, the ones who reminded me of myself when I first started out, hungry and unsure. I told them the same thing I told Ava, that waiting for recognition isn't enough, that you have to make damn sure your name is on what you build. And if someone tries to take it, you fight like hell to take it back. The firm felt different after that. There was a tension at first, people tiptoeing around me like they weren't sure what to say. But as the days went by, that changed. People came to me with questions, with ideas, with problems they couldn't solve. Because they knew I wasn't just another name on the project board. I was the guy who made sure the work didn't get buried. A couple weeks later, I stood in the lobby, looking up at the wall of names. My name wasn't on any of the old plaques, but it would be on the next one. Because I wasn't just building plans anymore. I was building a new culture. One that didn't let people like Linda take until there was nothing left. And maybe I'd never get a plaque for the years I'd spent in the shadows. But I had something better now. A reputation that was mine. A legacy I could be proud of. As I left the office that day, I thought about something Linda once said, that I wasn't leadership material. And I realized how wrong she'd been. Because the quiet guy in the back, he turned out to be the real architect of this firm's future.